The crystal champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the awards ceremony hall, sending shards across Elena Martinez's trembling feet as Marcus Chun's voice cut through her like a blade. "You, clumsy fool! Do you see what you've done? This is exactly why I can't trust you with anything important anymore." The entire table of restaurant industry executives turned to stare as Elena's face burned with humiliation, her hands shaking as she bent to pick up the pieces. Marcus grabbed her wrist with crushing force, his fingers digging into her skin as he hissed in her ear. "Clean it up quickly before you embarrass us further. And remember what we discussed about your little medical episodes. One wrong move tonight, and your insulin stays locked in my safe." The 60-year-old woman who had built 5 successful restaurants from nothing now cowered like a frightened child, her dignity stripped away in front of people who once respected her as a culinary pioneer. Elena's hands moved mechanically to gather the broken glass, each shard reflecting fragments of her shattered life. 20 years of building her restaurant empire, of earning respect in a male-dominant industry, of creating jobs for hundreds of employees. All of it now felt like a distant dream. The woman who once commanded kitchens with authority and grace was reduced to this, trembling on the floor while her abusers smiled charmingly at the concerned faces around them. "Elena's been having some health issues lately," Marcus explained smoothly to the other executives, his voice dripping with false concern. "The diabetes has been affecting her coordination and judgment. I've been taking care of the business side of things to reduce her stress." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that Elena felt a familiar stab of doubt. Maybe she really was losing her mind like he constantly told her. The drive home was silent except for Marcus's controlled breathing and the sound of Elena's quiet snip. Her wrist throbbed where he had grabbed her, already showing the purple fingerprints that would bloom into full bruises by morning. This wasn't the first time, and Elena knew with crushing certainty it wouldn't be the last. Marcus had perfected the art of hurting her in ways that could be explained away, a grip that left finger-shaped bruises hidden under long sleeves, psychological torture disguised as concern for her health, financial control wrapped in the language of protection. As they pulled into the driveway of the house she no longer felt was hers, Elena made a decision that surprised even her. She would run, just for one night, to the only person in the world who might understand. At 2 in the morning, Elena stood on her twin sister's doorstep in the suburbs, her designer dress wrinkled and her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. Dr. Sarah Martinez opened the door in her pajamas, took one look at her identical twin, and immediately pulled her inside without a single question. The two women hadn't spoken in months. Marcus had systematically isolated Elena from her family, claiming they didn't understand her condition and were bad influences on her fragile mental state. But standing in Sarah's warm kitchen under the soft light, Elena felt safe for the first time in years. Sarah's trained medical eye immediately cataloged the signs: the fading bruises on Elena's arms, the weight loss, the way she flinched when Sarah moved too quickly, the tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with her diabetes. "Tell me everything," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the same calm authority she'd used in countless emergency rooms over a 30-year career. And Elena did. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. Years of emotional manipulation, financial control, physical intimidation, and medical coercion. She told Sarah how Marcus had slowly inserted himself into every aspect of her business, claiming to protect her when her diabetes diagnosis came 5 years ago. How he'd convinced her employees, her accountant, even her doctor that she was becoming unreliable and needed someone to manage her affairs. How he'd moved into her home under the guise of being her caretaker, then systematically isolated her from friends and family who might question his methods. Sarah listened with growing horror and rage as Elena described Marcus's most insidious form of control. Using her insulin as leverage, he had convinced Elena's endocrinologist that she was becoming forgetful about her medication, taking control of her prescription, and keeping her insulin locked in a safe in his office. Every morning, Elena had to ask permission for her life-sustaining medication. Enduring his lectures about her incompetence and his speeches about how lucky she was to have someone who cared enough to keep her alive. If she displeased him, he would delay giving her the insulin, watching her anxieties spike as her blood sugar rose, reminding her that without him, She would die. It was psychological torture of the cruelest kind, weaponizing her medical condition against her. The financial abuse was equally devastating. Marcus had slowly gained signing authority on the business accounts, claiming it was temporary while Elena recovered from the stress of her diagnosis. But temporary became permanent, and Elena watched helplessly as he moved money between accounts, hired his friends for inflated consulting fees, and made business decisions without her input. When she tried to question him, he would pull out carefully doctored financial reports that made her restaurants look like they were failing, claiming her emotional instability was driving away customers and investors. He had convinced everyone that Elena Martinez, the woman who had built a restaurant empire through sheer determination and culinary brilliance, was no longer capable of running her own business. Sarah felt her medical training kick in as she observed her sister's condition. The signs were textbook classic patterns of abuse that she'd seen countless times in the emergency room. But this wasn't just any victim. This was her identical twin, the other half of her soul, the woman who had shared her dreams and fears since they were children. Looking at Elena was like looking into a mirror that reflected what she might have become under different circumstances. The thought filled Sarah with a cold fury that surprised her with its intensity. She had spent decades saving lives, but now she was faced with saving something equally precious: her sister's spirit, dignity, and freedom. "We're going to stop him," Sarah said with quiet determination, and Elena looked up with hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in years. But Sarah's next words made Elena's breath catch. "I'm going to take your place." The plan formed in Sarah's mind with the same clinical precision she used to diagnose patients. They were identical twins, differing only in hair length and the confidence in their bearing. Sarah would cut her hair to match Elena's current shoulder-length style, learn the key details of the restaurant business, and switch places with her sister long enough to gather evidence of Marcus's crimes. It was risky, potentially dangerous. But Sarah had faced danger before in emergency rooms filled with violent patients and desperate situations. Elena's protests came in a rush of fear and concern for her sister's safety. "You don't understand how dangerous he is, Sarah. He's not just manipulative. He's cruel. He enjoys watching me suffer. If he discovers you're not me, I don't know what he'll do." But Sarah had made up her mind. She had spent her entire career making split-second decisions in life-or-death situations, and her instincts told her this was the only way to free her sister from Marcus's web of control. They spent the rest of the night planning, with Elena teaching Sarah the details of the restaurant business, the names of key employees, the daily routines that Marcus monitored so carefully. By dawn, Sarah had transformed herself into Elena, complete with a slight stoop her sister had developed from years of walking on eggshells. The next morning, Sarah drove Elena's car back to the house that felt like a prison, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Marcus was waiting in the kitchen with Elena's morning insulin, his smile cold and calculating as he delivered his daily dose of psychological torture. "I hope you learned your lesson last night about embarrassing me in public," he said, holding the insulin pen just out of reach. "Your little episode at the awards dinner could have cost us the Morrison Group investment. Lucky for you, I was able to smooth things over by explaining about your condition." Sarah bit back the angry words that wanted to spill out, instead nodding submissively as Elena had taught her to do. Every instinct in her body screamed against this passive response, but she knew she had to play the part perfectly. Taking Elena's insulin shot felt like a violation of her own body, but Sarah endured it as she began to understand the daily humiliation her sister faced. Marcus watched her inject the medication with a satisfaction that made Sarah's skin crawl, clearly enjoying his position of power over what he believed was a life-or-death situation. "Good girl," he said patronizingly, patting Sarah's cheek in a gesture that made her want to break his fingers. "Now, let's discuss today's schedule. The accountant is coming at 10 to review the quarterly reports, and I need you to sign some transfer documents to streamline our operations. Nothing for you to worry your pretty little head about, just routine business improvements." The meeting with the accountant revealed the extent of Marcus's financial manipulation. Sarah watched with growing outrage as the man clearly. Marcus's accomplice presented reports that grossly understated the restaurant's profits while inflating operational costs. She saw line items for consulting fees paid to Marcus's shell companies, equipment purchases that never arrived, and maintenance contracts with his associates' businesses at 3 times the market rate. When Sarah tried to ask questions about the discrepancies, she noticed Marcus quickly cut her off with a gentle but firm reminder about her confusion with numbers since her diagnosis. The accountant nodded sympathetically, treating Sarah like a child who couldn't understand grown-up business matters. Elena has been having some cognitive issues related to her diabetes, Marcus explained smoothly to the accountant, his hand possessively gripping Sarah's shoulder. The doctors say it's affecting her judgment and memory. That's why I've been gradually taking over the business operations. We can't have her making decisions that could hurt the employees who depend on. Yes, Sarah felt her sister's humiliation burn through her own chest as she realized how Marcus had poisoned every professional relationship Elena had built over 20 years. These people who had once respected her sister now saw her as a liability, a broken woman who needed Marcus's protection to survive. The systematic destruction of Elena's reputation was almost more cruel than the physical and emotional abuse. That afternoon brought Sarah's first experience of Marcus's physical intimidation tactics. When she questioned a catering contract that seemed grossly overpriced, Marcus's demeanor shifted like a switch being flipped. His charming mask disappeared, replaced by a cold rage that filled the room with menacing energy. He stepped close to Sarah, using his height and bulk to loom over her as his voice dropped to a threatening whisper. I thought we discussed this morning about trusting my judgment on business matters. Are you having another one of your episodes? Or do I need to call Dr. Peterson about adjusting your medication? The implied threat was clear. Question him again and her medical care would suffer. When Sarah persisted with her questions, Marcus's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with brutal force, his fingers finding the exact pressure points that would cause maximum pain without leaving obvious bruises. Sarah had to use all her medical training to remain calm as Marcus's grip tightened, his eyes cold and calculating as he watched for her reaction. I know you're confused, sweetheart, he said in a sickeningly sweet voice that contradicted the pain he was inflicting. But I need you to trust me like you always have. These business decisions are too complicated for you to understand right now. Let me take care of everything while you focus on getting better. The gaslighting was masterful and cruel, designed to make Sarah doubt her own perception of reality. That evening, Sarah experienced the full horror of Marcus's psychological manipulation during dinner. He had prepared Elena's favorite meal, presenting it with flourishes and loving attention that would have seemed romantic to an outside observer. But Sarah quickly realized this was another form of control. Marcus monitored every bite Elena took, commenting on her appetite, her blood sugar management, her weight. You're looking a little thin, darling, he said with false concern, adding another serving to her plate. We can't have you getting weak and having more accidents like last night. Remember what happened the last time you weren't eating properly? You ended up in the emergency room with hypoglycemia because you weren't taking care of yourself. The manufactured crisis he referenced was clearly another of his manipulations, but Sarah could see how effectively it would control someone already vulnerable from medical care. Marcus had created a narrative where Elena was incapable of caring for herself, where every health issue was evidence of her incompetence rather than his sabotage. As the meal continued, Marcus's attention became suffocating, monitoring her water intake, commenting on her posture, adjusting the temperature because he claimed she was shivering from low blood sugar. Every gesture was designed to reinforce his position as the essential caretaker and her role as the helpless patient. Sarah felt claustrophobic under his constant supervision, understanding how Elena had lost herself under this relentless scrutiny. The second day brought Sarah face to face with the employees who had once been Elena's loyal team. Walking through the flagship restaurant where her sister had poured her heart and soul, Sarah saw how Marcus had poisoned these relationships too. The head chef, Maria, approached with the cautious concern of someone walking on eggshells. Mrs. Martinez, how are you feeling today? Mr. Chun told us you'd had a difficult evening yesterday. The woman's genuine worry was heartbreaking. She clearly cared about Elena, but had been convinced that her beloved boss was mentally deteriorating. Sarah realized that Marcus had turned Elena's own employees into unwitting participants in her isolation, making them believe they were protecting her by reporting her behavior to him. During the staff meeting, Sarah watched Marcus masterfully manipulate the narrative of Elena's capabilities. When Sarah made suggestions about menu changes, ideas that would have been welcome from Elena a year ago, Marcus gently redirected the conversation with subtle put-downs, disguised as protection. "Let's not overwhelm Elena with too many decisions right now," he would say. "Or I think Elena might be confusing that with something from the old menu, remember? The doctor said cognitive confusion is normal with her condition." The staff nodded sympathetically. Their respect for Elena now filtered through pity and concern for her supposed mental decline. Sarah wanted to scream the truth, but she knew she needed more evidence before she could expose Marcus's elaborate deception. The financial record Sarah managed to access during brief moments alone revealed the stunning scope of Marcus's theft. Over 3 years, he had systematically drained nearly $2 million from the restaurants through fraudulent contracts, inflated invoices, and outright embezzlement. He had created fake vendors, approved payments to shell companies, and even charged the businesses for personal expenses under the guise of business entertainment. Most cunningly, he had structured the theft to coincide with Elena's diabetes diagnosis. Creating a paper trail that suggested her declining mental state had led to poor financial decisions and business losses. Any forensic accountant would see through the deception, but Marcus had isolated Elena from anyone who might investigate. Sarah's third night in Elena's house brought the most terrifying escalation yet. When she attempted to access Elena's laptop to gather more evidence, Marcus appeared behind her like a shadow, his presence filling the room with menace. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" he asked in a voice that carried barely controlled violence. Sarah's medical training helped her recognize the signs of someone capable of extreme brutality, the controlled breathing, the still posture, the way his hands flexed at his sides. She realized that Elena had been living with a man who could seriously injure or kill her if he ever fully lost control. The thought sent ice through Sarah's veins, as she understood her sister had been in even more danger than she'd realized. "I was just checking email," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady as Marcus moved closer, his presence suffocating. "I thought maybe some of our suppliers had sent updates about the weekend. Orders." Marcus's hand came down on her shoulder with enough force to make her wince, his fingers digging into pressure points with the precision of someone who had done this before. "You know how confused you get with a computer, Elena? Remember what happened last month when you accidentally deleted all those important files? I had to spend days reconstructing our vendor contracts because of your mistake." Sarah realized this was another manufactured crisis. Marcus had likely deleted the files himself to further isolate Elena from the business operations and justify taking over her digital access. The psychological torture continued as Marcus spent the next hour helping Sarah with basic computer tasks, treating her like a child who couldn't understand simple concepts. He guided her mouse clicks, explained basic functions she obviously already knew, and corrected her mistakes with patronizing patience. "It's okay, darling," he would say. Each time he took control of the keyboard, "The medication affects your concentration. That's why I've been handling all the online banking and vendor communications. We can't risk any more expensive errors." Sarah realized that Elena had been cut off from digital communication entirely, isolated from suppliers, customers, and financial information that would have revealed Marcus's crimes. It was a prison of manufactured incompetence, designed to make Elena dependent while hiding the evidence of his theft. By the 4th day, Sarah had gathered enough evidence to destroy Marcus, but she needed one final piece, documented proof of his threats regarding Elena's medical care. She had recorded their conversations on her phone, photographed financial documents, and compiled a dossier that would send him to prison for years. But she needed him to explicitly threaten Elena's insulin access in a way that couldn't be explained away or denied. The opportunity came when Sarah deliberately questioned a medical appointment Marcus had scheduled with a new doctor she hadn't heard of. "I'm not sure I want to change physicians," Sarah said carefully. "Dr. Peterson has been managing my diabetes well, and I trust his judgment about my medication." Marcus's reaction was swift and brutal. His mask of care and concern dropped completely as he grabbed Sarah's chin and forced her to look at him, his grip painful and controlling. "Listen to me very carefully, Elena," he hissed. his voice filled with venom. "Dr. Peterson thinks you're becoming non-compliant with your medication schedule. This new doctor specializes in patients with cognitive decline and will help us develop a more structured treatment plan. If you fight me on this, if you make things difficult, I will have no choice but to take more direct control of your medical care." Do you understand what I'm saying? Sarah's phone, hidden in her pocket, captured every word of his threat as he continued his psychological assault. "I control your insulin, Elena. I control your access to medical care. I control your business, your employees, your financial future. Without me, you would be dead within days, either from diabetic complications or from the stress of trying to manage things you're no longer capable of." Handlin Marcus's voice was calm and matter-of-fact as he laid out the full scope of his control. Apparently confident that Elena was too broken to resist or record his threats, "This new doctor will prescribe medication to help with your anxiety and confusion. Medication that I will also manage for your safety. We're going to get you the help you need, whether you cooperate or not." Sarah realized he was planning to have Elena declared mentally incompetent, possibly even institutionalized, giving him complete legal control over her person and property. That night, Sarah made her final preparations for the confrontation that would free her sister. She copied all the evidence to multiple secure locations, sent detailed reports to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and contacted a domestic violence attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases. The restaurant industry's annual awards dinner was the following evening, the same event where Elena had been humiliated just a week ago. Sarah planned to attend with Marcus, playing the role of the submissive, broken woman one last time. But this Chimie, Elena would be there too, waiting in the wings with law enforcement and federal investigators ready to arrest Marcus in front of the entire industry community that had watched him systematically destroy her reputation. The day of the awards dinner, Marcus was particularly attentive and controlling. Clearly wanting to avoid another embarrassing episode like the previous week, he selected Sarah's dress, jewelry, and makeup, monitoring her appearance like a director, preparing an actress for a crucial scene. "Tonight is very important for our future, darling," he said as he brushed her hair with possessive strokes. "The Morrison Group is announcing their restaurant investment fund, and I want you to look your best when I accept the partnership offer on behalf of our businesses. Just smile, look pretty, and let me handle all the talking. Can you do that for me?" Sarah nodded obediently, playing her role while internally counting down the hours until Marcus's world would collapse. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt was filled with 300 of the city's most influential restaurant owners, investors, food critics, and industry leaders. Sarah recognized many faces from Elena's stories, people who had once been her allies, mentors, and friends before Marcus had poisoned their perception of her capabilities. As they entered the room, Marcus's hand possessively gripped Sarah's elbow, guiding her movements and controlling her interactions with military precision. "Remember," he whispered in her ear, "you're not feeling well tonight. If anyone asks about the business, direct them to me. I don't want you getting confused and saying something. That could hurt our reputation." The evening's early hours were a masterclass in public manipulation as Marcus worked the room with Elena's reputation as his shield. "Elena's been having some health challenges," he would explain to concerned colleagues, "but I've been helping manage the business side while she focuses on recovery. We're actually expanding. Just signed a major partnership with the Morrison Group thanks to some strategic improvements I've implemented." Sarah watched in fury as he took credit for Elena's lifetime of work, spinning his embezzlement and abuse as business acumen and devoted care. The industry leaders nodded with admiration for Marcus's dedication to his ailing partner, completely unaware they were witnessing the final act of a calculated destruction. When dinner was served, Marcus's control became even more suffocating as he monitored every bite Sarah took, commenting on her appetite and blood sugar in voices loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Careful with the dessert, sweetheart," he said with false concern. "Remember what happened last time you had too much sugar in an event like this. We don't want another medical emergency." Sarah realized he was setting the stage for Elena's supposed mental breakdown, preparing witnesses to his narrative of her incompetence and his heroic caretaking. The cruelty of using a medical condition as a weapon of humiliation made Sarah's hands shake with rage. but she maintained her performance, knowing that every moment of abuse was being documented for the final reckoning. As the awards ceremony began, Marcus grew more excited and possessive, clearly anticipating some kind of triumph. "They're going to announce the Morrison Group partnerships after the main awards," he whispered. "Sarah, when they call our restaurant group, I want you to stay seated and let me accept a loan. We agreed that public speaking makes you too anxious right now." Sarah nodded meekly, while checking her phone for the signal from Elena and the FBI team positioned throughout the ballroom. The trap was set, the evidence was compiled, and Marcus was about to experience the complete destruction of everything he had stolen through years of systematic abuse. The moment arrived as the MC announced special recognition for outstanding restaurant partnerships. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to acknowledge the Rosario Restaurant Group for their innovative approach to expansion and management during challenging times." Marcus stood with smug confidence, straightening his tie as he prepared to accept accolades built on Elena's stolen legacy. But instead of calling him to the stage, the MC continued. "However, before we proceed, we have a special presentation that reveals the true story behind this restaurant empire's success." The lights dimmed as a presentation screen descended, and Sarah felt her heart racing with anticipation for the justice that was about to unfold. The first slide displayed financial records showing Marcus's systematic embezzlement over 3 years. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as the audience saw evidence of fraudulent contracts, shell company payments, and outright theft totaling nearly $2 million. Marcus's face went white as he realized his crimes were being exposed to 300 industry professionals, investors, and media representatives. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "what you're seeing is evidence of one of the most sophisticated cases of financial elder abuse and domestic violence in our industry's history." The second slide showed photographs of Elena's bruises, medical records documenting Marcus's control over her insulin, and audio recordings of his threats to withhold life-saving medication. As the evidence mounted on screen, Marcus turned to Sarah with growing panic and rage, finally understanding that he had been deceived. "What have you done?" he hissed, grabbing her arm with brutal force. But Sarah was no longer playing the role of the broken, submissive victim. She stood tall, meeting his gaze with the confidence of someone who had spent 30 years facing down dangerous situations in emergency rooms. Doctor. "Sarah Martinez," she announced, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "and I've been documenting your abuse of my twin sister Elena for the past week. Everything you've done to her. The financial theft, the medical coercion, the psychological torture. It's all been recorded and reported to federal authorities." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs as people realized they had witnessed an elaborate deception designed to expose Marcus's crimes. But the revelation wasn't complete. From the back of the room, Elena Martinez walked forward with steady confidence, flanked by FBI agents and domestic violence investigators. The real Elena looked nothing like the broken woman Marcus had been controlling. Her posture was straight, her eyes clear, her voice strong as she approached the microphone. "My name is Elena Martinez," she announced to the stunned crowd, "and I am the sole owner and founder of the Rosario Restaurant Group. For 3 years, I have been systematically abused, financially exploited, and medically coerced by Marcus Chun, who used my diabetes diagnosis as a weapon to control every aspect of my life and steal my business." Marcus' panic turned to desperate rage as he realized the full scope of his exposure. He lunged toward Sarah, apparently intending to use physical force to escape or retaliate, but found himself immediately surrounded by FBI agents who had been positioned throughout the crowd. "Marcus Chun," announced Agent Rodriguez, "you are under arrest for domestic violence, financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, his facade of charm and control finally crumbled completely. The man who had seemed so powerful and manipulative now looked like what he really was, a common criminal and predator who had targeted a vulnerable woman and systematically destroyed her life for personal gain. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his reputation and freedom destroyed in the space of 15 minutes. Elena took the microphone with the same commanding presence she had once brought to her kitchens, addressing an industry that had unknowingly enabled her abuse through their acceptance of Marcus's lies. "I want everyone here to understand how sophisticated and gradual this abuse was," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "It began with small suggestions about my health, progressed to taking control of business decisions for my own good, and culminated in complete financial and medical coercion. If it weren't for my sister's courage and investigative skills, I might never have escaped this prison of manufactured helplessness." Speech revealed the full horror of her experience to 300 of the most influential people in the restaurant industry. She described how Marcus had turned her medical condition into a weapon, how he had isolated her from family and friends, how he had stolen millions while presenting himself as her devoted caretaker. "He convinced my employees that I was mentally declining," Elena explained. "He convinced my business partners that he was protecting their investments from my poor judgment. He convinced my doctor that I was becoming non-compliant with medication. He turned everyone who cared about me into unwitting participants in my abuse by making them believe they were protecting me from myself." The audience's shock turned to outrage as Elena detailed the financial crimes that had funded Marcus's lavish lifestyle, while her restaurants struggled under artificial burdens. "He didn't just steal money," she said. "He stole my reputation, my relationships, my sense of self-worth, and nearly my life. But the evidence my sister gathered this week will ensure that he faces justice for every crime he committed." The FBI agent on stage confirmed that Marcus faced federal charges that could result in decades in prison, while civil lawsuits would recover the stolen funds with interest and damages. Elena's voice grew stronger as she continued. "I'm sharing this publicly because financial elder abuse and domestic violence are often hidden behind closed doors, enabled by shame and isolation. Today, that silence ends." The immediate aftermath of Marcus's arrest revealed the extent of his criminal network. The accountant who had helped falsify records was arrested the following morning, along with 2 shell company operators who had received fraudulent payments. Elena's real physician, Dr. Peterson, confirmed that Marcus had been intercepting communications and providing false information about Elena's condition and medication compliance. "Mrs. Martinez was always perfectly capable of managing her diabetes," the doctor testified. "Her condition was well controlled, and she never showed signs of cognitive decline. Mr. Sean apparently convinced her to let him manage her prescription pickups, then used that access to create false narratives about her competence." Within 48 hours of the awards dinner, Elena's story had become national news, highlighting the sophisticated nature of financial elder abuse and the vulnerability of successful women who develop chronic health conditions. The restaurant industry rallied around Elena with overwhelming support, offering business partnerships, supplier relationships, and investment opportunities that Marcus had systematically destroyed through his lies about her capabilities. "The outpouring of support has been incredible," Elena told reporters. "So many people have contacted me to say they never believed Marcus's claims about my declining abilities, but they didn't know how to help or intervene. Now I realize how many allies I had who were prevented from reaching me by his manipulation. The financial recovery exceeded all expectations as federal investigators traced Marcus's assets and frozen accounts, revealed the full scope of his theft. Beyond the nearly $2 million stolen from Elena's restaurants, Marcus had been running similar scams against 3 other business partners, targeting successful women with chronic health conditions who could be portrayed as needing male protection and oversight. The total fraud exceeded $7 million, with Elena's case serving as the foundation for prosecuting an entire criminal enterprise built on exploiting vulnerable women through manufactured medical helplessness. Elena's restaurants experienced an immediate resurgence as the truth about their financial situation became clear. Without Marcus's fraudulent charges and embezzled profits, the businesses were actually thriving, with strong cash flow and excellent customer loyalty that had never wavered despite his attempts to undermine operations. The Morrison Group investment that Marcus had tried to claim credit for was actually a recognition of Elena's exceptional management skills and innovative culinary concepts. They had never intended to partner with Marcus at all, but directly with Elena, based on her 2 decades of proven success. 6 months after Marcus's arrest, Elena stood in the kitchen of her sixth restaurant, a new location that celebrated her comeback and served as a training center for other abuse survivors entering the culinary industry. The space was filled with warmth, creativity, and the bustling energy that had always been Elena's signature. But now, it carried an additional element: the confidence of someone who had survived her worst nightmare and emerged stronger. "I never thought I'd feel safe in my own kitchen again," Elena confided to Sarah during the grand opening celebration. "Marcus made me doubt every decision, every instinct, every skill I'd developed over 20 years. But being here now, teaching other survivors that they can rebuild their lives and careers, this feels like the real victory." Sarah watched her sister with pride as Elena moved through her kitchen with renewed confidence, directing her team with the natural authority that Marcus had tried so hard to destroy. The physical resemblance between the twins was still striking, but Elena's bearing was completely transformed. Gone was the fearful hunch, the anxious glances, the careful movements of someone walking on eggshells. In their place was the commanding presence of a successful restaurateur who had not only survived systematic abuse, but had turned her experience into a mission to help others. "You saved my life," Elena told Sarah during a quiet moment. "But more than that, you gave me back myself. I had forgotten who I was before Marcus, but switching places with you reminded me of my own strength." The legal proceedings continued for over a year, with Marcus ultimately receiving a sentence of 15 years in federal prison for financial fraud, domestic violence, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The civil judgments awarded Elena full restitution plus punitive damages that bankrupted Marcus and served as a warning to other potential predators. But perhaps, more importantly, Elena's case led to new legislation strengthening protections for people with chronic medical conditions who might be vulnerable to caretaker abuse, and mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions that notice patterns suggesting elder financial abuse. Elena's story became a powerful symbol of survival and recovery in domestic violence advocacy circles. She testified before Congress about the sophisticated nature of medical coercion abuse, helping legislators understand how chronic health conditions could be weaponized by intimate partners and business associates. The general public thinks domestic violence is just physical bruises, Elena explained to the congressional committee, but financial abuse, medical coercion, and systematic isolation can be just as deadly, and they're much harder for outsiders to recognize and address. We need better training for medical professionals, financial institutions, and business partners to recognize the signs and know how to intervene safely. 2 years after the awards dinner that exposed Marcus's crimes, Elena's restaurant empire had expanded to 8 locations, with a waiting list of investors wanting to partner with her legitimate business operations. The Rosario Restaurant Group had become synonymous with both culinary excellence and ethical business practices, attracting customers who appreciated Elena's commitment to supporting abuse survivors through employment opportunities and advocacy work. Each restaurant featured a small plaque near the entrance, in memory of all survivors who found their voice, and in hope for those still searching for theirs. The simple message resonated with customers and employees alike, creating a culture of support and empowerment that pervaded every aspect of the business. Elena's relationship with her employees had been completely restored once they understood the truth about Marcus's manipulation. Maria, the head chef who had been convinced Elena was mentally declining, became one of her strongest advocates and closest friends. "I feel terrible that we didn't see through his lies," Maria confessed during a staff meeting where Elena addressed Marcus's deception openly. "But he was so convincing, so concerned, so professional in how he explained your condition. He made us believe we were protecting you by reporting to him and limiting your stress. Now, I understand we were actually participating in your imprisonment." Elena's forgiveness and understanding helped heal the relationships Marcus had poisoned, creating an even stronger team bound by shared commitment to preventing such manipulation in the future. Sarah returned to her retirement with a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing she had used her medical training and investigative skills to save her sister's life and expose a dangerous predator. The experience had been traumatic. Experiencing even a week of Marcus's psychological abuse had given her lasting appreciation for survival and strength. But it had also been deeply meaningful. I spent 30 years in emergency rooms saving people from medical crises, Sarah reflected. But helping Elena escape Marcus felt like the most important case of my career. Sometimes the most critical emergencies aren't the ones that arrive in ambulances. They're the ones that happen slowly, quietly, behind closed doors, where no one can see the patient's pain. The twins' relationship had been transformed and strengthened by their shared experience of Marcus's deception. Elena's gratitude was matched by Sarah's admiration for her sister's resilience and recovery. "I always knew Elena was strong," Sarah told reporters who asked about the switching plan. "But I didn't fully understand the courage it takes to survive systematic abuse while maintaining hope for escape. She endured years of torture while protecting her employees and trying to preserve the business she'd built with her own hands. I only have to endure Marcus for a week, and it was the most difficult acting job of my life." Elena lived that nightmare every day and still found the strength to reach out for help. She's the real hero of this story. Elena's advocacy work expanded beyond restaurant industry reform to broader domestic violence, prevention, and education. She developed training programs for medical professionals to recognize signs of caretaker abuse, particularly targeting situations where chronic health conditions might make patients vulnerable to coercion. Doctors need to understand that when someone suddenly needs a caretaker to manage their medication or communicate with medical staff, that's a red flag worth investigating, Elena explained during medical conference presentations. Diabetics don't suddenly lose the ability to manage insulin. They've been handling for years, but abusers are very skilled at creating plausible medical narratives to explain their control. The financial fraud case continued to yield.